I never imagined that summer would change everything. My name is Julia, and I'm 45, though most people are surprised when they hear it. I've always looked younger than my age, something I chalk up to a healthy lifestyle and a touch of good genetics. But lately, I'd begun to feel older in ways I hadn't expected. My second husband, Greg, doesn't notice much about me anymore. At 54, he seems to have slipped quietly into inertia, content with sitting back, watching television, and waiting for life to happen around him. And then there's Oliver. My son. My first love in a way. He's 22 now, serious, brilliant, thoughtful. There's something about him that reminds me so much of myself. Even as a little boy, he was never one for playfulness. He had this stillness about him, a calm kind of wisdom that made him stand out. While other children chased each other through playgrounds, Oliver would sit with a book or ask me endless, thoughtful questions. Now he's back home for the summer, in that liminal space between who he's been and who he's becoming. It's his last vacation before his final year at university, and I want to make it meaningful for both of us. Greg barely lifts a finger around the house, and one afternoon, I found myself staring at a pile of chores and tasks I couldn't handle alone. I hesitated before knocking gently on Oliver's bedroom door. "Hey," I said, leaning into the doorway. He looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable but focused. That's another thing about Oliver. He always listens, truly listens, and I never have to repeat myself. "I have a favor to ask." "A few, actually," I admitted. "I don't want to take up your time for nothing, so I'd like to pay you just a little something for helping me around the house." His eyes flicked with something I couldn't name. Surprise? Amusement? "Pay me," he said slowly, a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "You don't have to do that." "I do," I said firmly. "You're not a child anymore. I respect your time, and I know you probably had other plans." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, if it makes you feel better." That's how it started. Small tasks at first. Fixing the leaky kitchen faucet, organizing the garage, carrying boxes up from the basement. I would find myself watching him when he wasn't looking, marveling at how much he had changed. His shoulders had broadened, his jaw had sharpened, but it was his confidence that struck me most. He moved with an assurance that seemed to radiate from the inside out. And yet, there was still something unspoken between us. It crept in during quiet moments, like when we worked side by side in the kitchen, our arms brushing as we reached for the same dish. Or when he'd catch my eye and hold my gaze a second longer than expected. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just lonely, projecting things that weren't really there. But the awareness grew. One afternoon, I was bent over in the garden, pulling weeds when he walked up behind me with a glass of lemonade. "You missed lunch," he said, handing it to me. "Figured you needed a break." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. "Thanks." I lost track of time. He watched me drink, his eyes thoughtful. "You do too much," he said quietly. "Greg should be the one helping you, not sitting around doing nothing." His words caught me off guard. There was a quiet edge in his voice, protective, even indignant. I smiled, not sure what to say. "He's comfortable," I said diplomatically. Oliver didn't reply, just looked at me like he was seeing something I hadn't let anyone see in a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when things had changed. Wondering if I had been so desperate for companionship that I was starting to read into things that weren't there. But then came the night that changed everything. Greg had gone out with friends, and I was in the kitchen making tea when Oliver walked in. He didn't say anything right away, just leaned against the counter and looked at me with those deep, serious eyes. "Why do you put up with it?" he asked after a long pause. "With what?" "With him. The way he treats you. Or doesn't." I blinked, startled by the intensity in his voice. "Because that's what you do when you're married," I said softly. "You compromise. You settle." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to." There was a silence then, heavy and charged. And in that silence, I felt something shift. It started off as just another warm, drowsy afternoon. The sun hung heavy over the house, its rays stretching across the hardwood floors in golden slats. I had been hunched over my desk for hours, poring over spreadsheets for work, my shoulders knotting tighter with each passing minute. When I stood to stretch, a sharp ache radiated through my lower back, pulling a soft gasp from my lips. I knew I needed help. Not medical help, not a chiropractor. Just a moment of release. A pair of strong hands to knead out the stress. And then, a thought crossed my mind, a thought I tried to dismiss, but it came back again and again, louder each time, like a whisper turning into a knock at the door. I found myself walking down the hallway, my footsteps hesitant, my heart unsure. Oliver's door was half open. He was sprawled on the bed, one arm tucked behind his head, reading something on his tablet. He looked so at ease, so comfortable in his own skin. "Hey," I said gently, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up, immediately alert.
"Hey.
"Everything okay?" I nodded, but slowly. "Can I ask you something a little different?" He raised an eyebrow, curious.
"Sure."
I hesitated, then stepped into the room. I've had this knot in my back for hours. I've been working nonstop, and it just won't go away. I was thinking, would you mind giving me a massage? He blinked, surprised. "A massage?"
"Yes."
"I'll pay you for your time like we agreed. It's just," I rubbed the back of my neck awkwardly. "I don't want to bother you, but I really could use the help." He sat up slowly, setting his tablet aside. "You don't need to pay me for something like that. But I want to," I said quickly, almost too quickly. "I don't want to take advantage of you. Your time matters." His gaze softened. "Mom, you're not taking advantage. Of course I'll help." I led him to the living room where I had already laid out a soft throw blanket on the couch. The windows were open, letting in the scent of cut grass and distant lilac. The house felt suspended in quiet, like the world had paused just for us. I sat down and pulled my hair into a loose twist, exposing the nape of my neck. "It's mostly my shoulders and back," I murmured. Oliver sat behind me, his hands hovering for a moment before he touched me. The first contact made me flinch, not from pain, but from the shock of his touch. His palms were warm and sure, pressing gently into my shoulders. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. He worked silently, slowly. His fingers moved with a care that felt intentional. Not casual, not impersonal. It wasn't just the relief that made my skin flush. It was the awareness of how close we were. How this felt like something beyond routine. "You're really tense," he said quietly, his voice close to my ear. "Yeah," I breathed. "I guess I've been holding a lot in." His thumbs pressed into the curve of my neck, and I felt a shiver ripple through me. I hated how my body reacted, how my thoughts began to spiral. This was Oliver, my son, and yet, he paused for a moment. "You okay?" "Yes," I whispered. "Keep going."
He did.
I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel the tension leave my muscles, even as a new kind of tension curled in its place. His touch had changed, still careful, still gentle, but with something deeper behind it. A tenderness, an unspoken understanding. I could feel his breath near my hairline. I could feel the restraint in his fingers. When he stopped, my body felt light, but my chest was tight. "Thank you," I said, turning to face him. His eyes met mine, steady and searching. "Anytime." And in that moment I knew. Something had changed. Something we couldn't take back. I stayed there for a while, letting the silence settle between us like a warm blanket. My body was relaxed, yes, but not entirely. Something lingered, a subtle pull, a need I hadn't fully confronted. My thoughts tangled in themselves, one feeding the next until I blurted out the words before I could think too hard. "Can you go on a bit more?" I heard the shift in his breathing before his voice, cautious, but open. "Go on with what?" I hesitated, shame creeping up my spine like a slow burn. "Maybe a foot massage?" I laughed nervously, trying to pass it off as casual. "Or just above the knees. I've been on my feet all day." The air went still. It wasn't the request that unsettled me, it was the way I wanted it. the way it made my heart beat faster. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about aching muscles anymore. "You really don't have to pay me, you know," he said after a pause, his tone unreadable. "I know," I murmured. "But I want to. Just let me."
He didn't reply.
But then I felt his hands, gentle, patient, move lower. First to my calves, pressing firmly but slowly, and then down to my feet, tracing the tension there with a care that felt too precise to be accidental. I bit my lip. His thumbs pressed into the arch of my foot, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My skin was buzzing. It wasn't just relief anymore, it was something warmer, something softer, something dangerous. And then his hands began to move upward. Not urgently, not boldly, but just enough to send a flicker of heat through me. His touch stayed within reason, respectful, and yet it danced on the edge of something far more intimate. My breath hitched when he reached just above my knees. I told myself it was just a massage, just care. But we both knew that wasn't all it was anymore. The room was filled with nothing but the sound of our breathing, the open window ushering in a breeze that did nothing to cool the tension in the air. I felt his fingers slow, pause. Then he asked, his voice lower now, more careful. "Is this okay?" I swallowed, unsure if I could even trust my voice. "Yes," I said softly. "It's perfect." He stayed there for a moment longer, his touch lingering at the edge of comfort and curiosity. And then he slowly drew his hands back. Neither of us said a word as I sat up, brushing my hair back behind my ear. I didn't look at him right away. I couldn't. But when I did, I saw something in his eyes that both terrified and thrilled me. Awareness. Connection. We were no longer walking the path we had always known. We were someplace new now, quiet, uncertain, and charged with possibility. I stayed still, unsure of what to do next, unsure of where we stood after the fragile quiet that followed his hands leaving my skin. But I didn't move. Maybe I couldn't. Maybe I didn't want to. And then, without a word, I felt his hands return. Slowly, purposefully. They slid along the sides of my legs again, working upward, this time more confidently, as though the silence between us had given him permission I never voiced. I should have said something, anything. I should have asked what he was doing. But I didn't. I just let it happen. He shifted behind me, and suddenly, his voice, soft and steady, broke the hush. "Lie back," he said. "Put your head here." I turned slightly, just enough to see that he had made space for me to rest on his legs. There was no hesitation in his expression. No discomfort. Just calm, collected intent. I slowly laid my head down across his thighs, the warmth of him grounding me. I was still in my summer dress, the fabric thin between us, and I became keenly aware of every inch where our bodies met. Then his hands moved again, this time higher. Gentle pressure across my collarbones. The curve of my shoulder. Downward, easing over my chest. I froze. Not from fear. From the stunning, electric stillness that seized me the moment his fingers touched the place no one had in years. He didn't speak, and neither did I. My breath was shallow. My eyes stared at the ceiling, counting invisible cracks in the plaster, anything to keep from spiraling. But the spiral came anyway. Because he wasn't rushing. He wasn't careless. His fingers traced over me like I was something sacred, slow circles over the edge of fabric, the space just above my heart. As if he were trying to comfort me or understand me. As if he was asking a question without words. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. His hands moved with a strange mixture of reverence and certainty. Like he had imagined this moment and was only now daring to step into it. I kept waiting for the fear, the guilt, the recoil, but what came instead was quiet. A stillness I hadn't felt in years. I closed my eyes. I didn't say his name. I didn't ask what he was doing or why. And he didn't ask if it was all right this time. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe, deep down, I had already answered him with my stillness, my silence, my surrender. And somehow, That felt like the most honest moment between us yet. The room was still. My breath came shallow and uneven, a strange pressure building in my chest, like a storm gathering behind my ribs. I didn't move, not even when Oliver's fingers, careful and unwavering, continued tracing circles over my skin, his palms grounded against me like he was anchoring me to the earth. I felt warmth flood through me, more than physical. It reached into places I hadn't let anyone touch for years, places I didn't even know still existed. The longer it went on, the harder it became to stay composed. My body betrayed me first, hips tensing, breath catching a low, quiet sound rising from the back of my throat. I brought my hand to my mouth, reflexively, to silence it, to keep this from spilling into something too real, something I couldn't undo. But Oliver noticed. His hand left my chest and reached for mine. He gently pulled it away from my lips and held it in his own, his voice low and firm as he whispered, "Don't hold back." I looked up at him then. Really looked. He wasn't the boy I had raised. He wasn't confused or unsure.
He knew.
And still he stayed. He leaned closer, his breath grazing my forehead, his touch no longer just soothing but deliberate. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with everything I wasn't saying, everything I couldn't admit to myself. So I just lay there, my head still on his lap, feeling the steady beat of his heart where it met my cheek. And then, he kissed me. Not sudden, not wild. It was quiet, measured, an answer to every word we hadn't said. His lips brushed mine with a reverence that made my heart twist. Like he wasn't asking for anything, only giving. I didn't pull away. For a single, breathless moment, I let it happen. Because deep down I knew this was the moment we passed the point of no return.